Welcome to the Successfully Retired podcast with Hamilton Brandenburg.
All right, Hamilton. Today we are going to talk about, I think, maybe one of the best kept secrets in saving and retirement planning. It's simple on the surface, but it can get complex. And that's just a regular taxable brokerage account or just your run of the mill investment account and all the things it can do for someone saving for retirement and just saving in general. How does that sound? You want to go there
Dude,
today?
that is a fantastic idea.
I know you love it. Yeah.
So often overlooked. Tell me,
Yeah.
so for our listeners, just very basically, what is a taxable brokerage account? Who can own one?
Everybody, just your standard. I open an investment account. There's no inherent tax benefits to it. There's no limits. There's no age restrictions. There's no nothing. Just I have $1. I earned it at work. I paid tax on it. It's sitting in the bank. I want to go invest it. You can invest it in just a regular investment account.
Yep. What are some of the features of the real big advantages to having a taxable brokerage account?
No contribution limits like a Roth or an IRA. Put as much, I had a good year this year. I want to drop 200 grand in there. Do it, right? There's no limit, no income limit. I didn't earn too much to be allowed to invest this year, right? I
Yep.
mean, those are two big ones, especially for business owners or high wage earners.
Yep.
It gives you a lot of flexibility of the amount of money you can put in. But then on the back end, the same type of thing where you don't have early withdrawal penalties.
Yeah.
I put 100 grand in and I want $20,000 back the next day. Go for it. Right.
Yeah.
There's no 10% penalty. You have to wait till you're 59 and a half and all this stuff because you're not getting a tax advantage from the IRS. So they can't tell you what to do with it and when. And those are two of the biggest ones. And then, we can get into actually how to shave more taxes when you start getting fancy with it.
I think you can't oversell the benefit of flexibility. And I have a lot of families. I talked about this in a recent episode I did on saving for college. I have a lot of families who will use a taxable brokerage account, maybe for multiple purposes. Mom and dad might be saving for their retirement in it so that they have some flexibility to retire under the age of 59 and a half without looking at deciding how they want to pay penalties on an IRA. But maybe they're also putting some money in that same account for junior's college down the road if he goes to college, or for a down payment on his house if he doesn't. So the possible uses of a brokerage account are endless. And a lot of times people think, well, I'm maxing out my 401k and I'm maxing out my Roth. So, that's good enough. And that's great if you're doing both of those things. But there's still more that you can do. And I'll put it this way. I've never had a retiree look at me and be like, Hamilton, I wish that I had less money in my traditional IRA. I wish that I had more money in my traditional IRA and less in my taxable brokerage account. I'm sure they're out there. I just haven't met them yet because the flexibility is so fantastic.
They're not talking to us. And here's the thing. Again, I want to kind of preface this. We're not saying don't put money in your 401k. Don't defer any taxes. This is not a one or another, but it is when a client comes to me and they have dollars in different buckets, traditional IRA, Roth, and taxable brokerage account. There are so many more things that I can do for them rather than all the dollars being in one of those buckets.
I've gotten into making
that's
curry
really
lately.
what we're talking about.
I've gotten into making curry lately and different I've got this whole cookbook. And the funny thing is none of these fantastic recipes are made out of like one ingredient, right? A lot of people are saving as if their retirement should be one ingredient, their 401k.
Yeah.
And you throw other ingredients in there, other account types, and it just gives you more unique ways to plan for a tax efficient retirement. 100%. I think one of the big advantages for retirees, Rick, that I see a lot is just the ability to take advantage of the long-term capital gains rate versus ordinary income. I mean, think about.
Well, tell us a little bit about that, because it's something that I've been doing a lot more of in my practice, paying attention to more and manipulating a little bit more. But just give the listener a little overview of how does that work and what's the advantage to them, assuming that they're invested the right way.
Sure. So think about if you take out $100,000 out of your traditional IRA, you're going to pay income taxes as if they were like wages that you earned that year. And you're also probably going to pay state income taxes if you live in a state that has those. So, you might end up paying, 10, 15, 20%, depending on what your taxes are on that transaction on $100,000 that you're taking out. When you
Yeah.
take money out of a brokerage account, let's say you're selling a stock or you're selling an investment that has grown, all that you're potentially paying taxes on when you're selling an investment that's grown in your brokerage account is the growth, the long-term capital gains, provided that you've held it for longer than a year. Now,
Right.
what does that really mean? Think about it this way. The long-term capital gains rate for a couple that's married filing jointly is 0% for up to $96,000 roughly
Yeah.
in income this year. So that means you could take out, if you're selling $100,000 position and your gain on it is $50,000,
Yeah.
depending on what your other income sources are and how they stack up, you could have 0% tax on that whole transaction versus if you're taking it out of your IRA, 10, 20%, maybe more.
Yeah. And that's where some planning opportunities come in. We don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this for this episode, but for example, well, but Rick, we make more than 100 grand. That who cares? No, now we're talking about people that you've made it to retirement. You saved all this money up. We can reduce your spending in other areas for one tax year
Yep.
to get your taxable income down, capture some of those gains, or capture some of them in December and some of them in January. You still get 100 grand in your bank account, but it's split between 2 tax years, and try to get your capital gains rate in that example to zero. You pay $0 on those gains, or for most people, at a minimum 15%, which is still going to be lower than at your regular income rate.
And that 15% capital gains rate goes up to over like $600,000
Yeah,
for a couple
for
who's
the
married
people
filing jointly.
listening to this, that's what your number is going to be. It's going to be 0 or 15, which is very favorable compared to adding it to your income because, and again, we're talking about retirement, but it happens before retirement too. Not only are you adding it to your income when you take out of the IRA for income taxes, but then that affects other things because your income goes up, which might affect your health insurance
Yep.
or your Medicare premiums or the taxability of your Social Security, all these other things. So it can be expensive to take money out of those IRA or 401k dollars beyond just the tax bill that you're withholding.
I've also had families who, depending on where you're holding your brokerage account, sometimes you can do what's called a margin loan, which we won't get into all the features of that. But
Yeah.
occasionally I've had families who will borrow against their assets in their brokerage account
Mhm.
tax free and then turn around and pay that off, kind of similar to how you do with a 401k. But
Yeah.
it's just another way of being able to touch your retirement funds in a very tax efficient manner if you're in a year where you're thinking, hey, this is a year where I really need to make sure to minimize my taxes.
Yeah. And I want to make one more point about the taxes and we'll move on to the before retirement type of flexibility because what you said just made me think of that. But the other thing about the taxes is while it's growing and while you're in retirement, before and after retirement, depending on your income, depending on all these other factors, there's things you can do: tax loss harvesting, tax gain
Oh,
harvesting,
yeah.
right? Using municipal bonds to get, if you're in a high income right now and you don't want to have, big dividend income, you can use municipal bonds, get tax-free dividends in there. The growth is being held at long-term capital gain that you don't realize until you sell. All these different things that you can do that's, for me, is fun,
Yeah.
right? But for the client, all they're saying is, hey, I have $600,000 in this account and I was getting a 1099 for $30 or $40,000 a year, and now all of a sudden I'm getting it for 11,000.
Mm,
That completely changes. That completely changes their tax situation for the next 20 or 30 years. And all we did was invest it differently,
yep.
the right way, and pay attention to it rather than sticking them in some mutual funds that kick out a lot of taxable gains every single year.
100%. I see families in retirement too. I hope I'm not skipping ahead by saying this, but they're thinking towards the conclusion of their retirement and
Yeah.
what they're going to leave behind to their kids. And maybe they have a traditional IRA and a taxable brokerage account. And so while they're in retirement, maybe they're spending more out of their traditional IRA and they're
Yeah.
thinking, I will leave behind the traditional brokerage account to the people who I want to bless instead of the IRA. Now, why don't you tell us for a second why is that something that somebody might want to consider doing if leaving a legacy is important to them?
Yeah, well, they're doing that because somebody gave them that advice. That's not what they tell you
No,
when they first come in.
no, it's
They
not.
tell you the opposite because they don't want to pay tax on their IRA while they're in retirement. They say we'll save that for the kid, but it's the way you said it is the correct way, because that taxable brokerage account or the regular investment account, when it transfers to the kids, they're going to get what's called a step up in basis, which means in your example, I put 50 grand in, it grew to 100. I, as the owner of it, takes it out. I have to pay gains on that $50,000 of growth. But if I die, my beneficiary, in this example, my children, get a stepped up basis, which means their new cost basis for the IRS is as if they put the 100,000 in themselves. They sell it the next day. There's no gain to pay on. And that is
Absolutely.
a huge advantage when you start adding zeros to that account and it's $1 million, 2 million, 3 million, it's massive gains. And then add in the fact that, like we've spoken about in previous episodes, likely their income tax is lower in their retirement than their adult children's are at the peak of their earnings. So we can start spending the IRA dollars at a lower tax rate, pass on the brokerage account, get a stepped up cost basis, and the overall tax liability to that family and the next generation is smaller simply by selecting where the dollars come from. The mom and dad still spend the same amount, the kids still inherit the same amount, just less overall goes to the IRS.
Absolutely. You're just taking the IRS a little bit out of that middleman position where they're
Yeah,
holding their hand out, waiting for some of the inheritance you're
just a little
passing to
bit
your
more
kids.
finesse. Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Uh,
So
Now,
what about on my way to retirement? Like that, we could go on and on about all the fun things that we can do with having that account as part of our arsenal in retirement. But what about, okay, I'm 40 right this second. Why should I start to put dollars in an account like that for me and my wife now? What's the advantage of it now and in 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30, before I even start worrying about retirement? I'm not worried about that right now.
sure. I think a couple things. One that we've hit on a lot is the flexibility of being able to use it for other purposes, using it for your kids'
Yeah.
education, using it because, hey, I'm buying and selling a house and I need 50 grand that I'm going to put back quickly, but I don't
Yeah.
want to worry about a taxable distribution out of my IRA and I don't want to deplete my savings. So just
Yeah.
flexibility of use, I think, is a big one. One that I don't want to hit on too much because I think I could do a whole episode just on how the mechanics of it works, is tax
Yeah.
loss harvesting, being able to
Yeah.
take investment positions that are maybe down and sell them so that you can take a portion of the amount of money you lost and write it off
Yeah.
against your income. And we had families who did this in 2020 when the market pulled back quick, and even 22, where we were able to write off losses for multiple years to reduce future years tax burden by having
Yeah.
these losses, where we're able to get out of an investment at the appropriate time, get back in. And so we're staying in the market substantially, but we're capturing this write off that we are able to
Yeah.
carry that we couldn't do if that investment was in an IRA.
That's right. And you can capture gains. I do this on smaller accounts. On We know we've talked about this, doing it on minors accounts.
Yep.
We're capturing gains every year to stay under a certain tax limit so that we're essentially claiming the gains, but the tax rate's always zero as long as you continue to do it. I also set limits. I know some software allows you to do it, some don't. I can set a limit. So a person says, I'm only willing to capture or accept this much or realize this much gains this year,
Yeah.
because as soon as I go over that, it's going to affect these other things. I can set my portfolios to literally say, do not capture more than $11,000 worth of gains this year. And that will stop it from trading or rebalancing when it hits that trigger, so that their health insurance doesn't skyrocket or it messes up something else that they're planning for that year. There's a lot of fancy things that you can do while we're younger. But the biggest advantage to me, and the way I think as the investor, not as the advisor, is I put a ton of money in this thing, and I don't want to be told that I have to wait till I'm 60 years old to start spending it.
Yeah.
You don't know what life is going to throw at you tomorrow. And maybe it's an emergency, or maybe it's an opportunity, or maybe it's just hell, we're going to do that thing and
Yeah.
I'll make up for it later. You should, it gives you the ability to say, I got $250,000 in this thing. I'm 45 years old and you're telling me that I can't touch it till I'm 60.
Yeah.
I only want 20 grand.
Yep.
I only want $20,000 to do this thing for my family. And I'm technically allowed in the IRA, but I'm going to have to pay penalties.
Yeah. How many families have we met with that were in their 20s and 30s who are on track for retirement, and something that nobody could have predicted happened to them in their 40s and
Yeah.
50s, and they needed to touch something that was beyond their savings accounts? It just
Yeah.
gives you that much more flexibility, and you have to be prepared for life to not be perfect. You need to be careful with a taxable brokerage account. It's nothing to be afraid of, but you need to be careful that with what you put inside of it and how you
Yeah.
trade it, because you are paying taxes on dividends, interest, and capital gains along the way as those are
Yeah.
happening. And so you want to make sure you're having, if you're in a higher tax bracket, you want to make sure you have tax sensitive investments in there. You want to make
Yeah.
sure that you are aware if the investments that you own, like say mutual funds, for example, those will pay capital gains out every year to their shareholders if they
Yeah.
had a good year. And you want to make sure that you're not in a situation where you unexpectedly have, $100,000 of capital gains paid out to you that you weren't anticipating to increase your tax burden. So there's ways to
Yeah.
make missteps with this, but I think if you work with somebody who works in this arena, that's going to be
Yeah.
something they're going to help you navigate. So just be conscious of what you pick for your investments in a brokerage account and how often
Yeah.
you trade, because I'd
Yeah.
say that's really the main drawback. I can't really think of any other huge drawbacks to having them. Can you?
That's it. No, the biggest thing is we're assuming for the purposes of this conversation, we're talking about all the great stuff. We're assuming it's being done right.
Yeah.
Just like everything, there's ways to mess it up. And you're dancing around a little bit more. I'm just going to come up and say it. This is not investment advice. There's I can't think of a good reason to hold a mutual fund anymore in 2025. Okay. So consider that if you're being told, hey, buy this mutual fund because it did good last year, ask them what the capital gain distribution was and the dividend distribution was. Okay.
Big
That's
time.
where people start getting messed up is they're not spending any of this money and they're paying massive taxes in their high earning years when their income is at its highest because they have these dinosaur archaic funds. So talk to somebody that knows what the heck they're doing, but
Yeah.
assuming it's being done correctly or even half right, there's a lot of advantages. And the big one that we keep going back to is just the flexibility. Your life is going to change, and this is going to allow you to access those dollars at different stages and at different tax rates.
And don't think, to your point, I think we can wrap up here soon, but don't think just because you're doing some Roth and you're doing some 401k that's going to provide you everything you need. Make sure that
Yeah.
you are considering all account types that are available to you. And
Mm-hmm.
it's, for most people, probably a great idea to at least put some money in a taxable brokerage account.
That's a great overview. Take a look at the taxable brokerage account. Look at your taxability of savings right now. If you put it in a pie chart, if there's a big piece of that pie in one versus all three, just start thinking about the diversity of how you'll be taxed in the future when you start spending your money. That's all.
Great. I love it. Good talk, man.
All right, buddy. Thanks.
One more thing before you go, you should know that this podcast reflects the personal opinions and viewpoints of myself, your host, and Brandenburg Financial Services. The information that I'm presenting is not a comprehensive analysis of all the topics we're talking about. It's general in nature, and it's not personalized investment advice, so please do not construe it as a recommendation to purchase or sell any particular security or strategy. The views reflected are subject to change at any time without notice, and no representation is made as to the accuracy, completeness, or relevance of the information presented. Guest appearances on this podcast do not represent an endorsement, a level of expertise, recommendation, or any affiliation with Brandenburg Financial Services. This podcast may contain information that could assist you in the development of subsequent discussions with the appropriate professionals, and should not be construed as investment, tax, insurance, or legal advice. Therefore, please consult your financial, tax, legal, and insurance professionals regarding your specific situation. Any forecasts or forward-looking statements are based on assumptions, may not materialize, and are subject to revision without notice. Past performance is not indicative of future returns. Investment advisory services offered through CS Planning, an SEC-registered investment advisor doing business as Brandenburg Financial Services.